Al-Qaeda-linked extremist groups in Syria are seeking to recruit and train Americans and then send them back to carry out terror attacks. Now, that's what US intelligence and counter-terrorism officials are claiming, with the tracking of those who've returned from Syria now one of their top tasks. RT's Marina Portnaya has the details.
Top U.S. intelligence officials say all these efforts are in their early stages, but nonetheless, the FBI director says that now tracking Americans who have returned from Syria has become among the Bureau's highest counterterrorism priorities. Now, according to senior counterterrorism officials, Islamic extremist groups in Syria with ties to Al-Qaeda are trying to identify, recruit, and train Americans and other Westerners who have traveled there, and to get them to carry out attacks when they have returned home. U.S. officials say at least 70 Americans have either traveled to Syria or tried to since the civil war started 3 years ago. That number, till this point, was never disclosed. This is the first time that that number, 70, has been disclosed by U.S. officials. Now, Syria's civil war no doubt has become a magnet for Westerners seeking to fight with rebels against the government of President Bashar al-Assad. And all this news is coming, ironically, as the Obama administration is reportedly considering the resumption of non-lethal military aid to Syria, Syria's moderate opposition. But that's despite the fact that some of that non-lethal aid may end up in the hands of Islamist groups allied with the moderates, or posing as allied with the moderates. Now, the United States suspended shipments of non-lethal aid last month after warehouses of equipment were seized by the Islamic Front, a coalition of Islamist fighters that broke with the American-backed Free Syrian Army. So clearly, the Obama administration has a complex situation on their hands. On one hand, U.S. citizens traveling there may be turned into terrorists to carry out attacks when they return home. On the other hand, the Obama administration may resume non-lethal aid imported into Syria. Clearly, a very complex situation that so far the Obama administration has not found an answer to.
So the US is highly likely to resume non-lethal military aid to the Syrian opposition. So what exactly do they want to send? Well, non-lethal aid is everything needed for combat except for guns and bullets. It includes body armor, night vision goggles and communication equipment. But there are a lot of grey areas here when non-lethal objects become lethal. For example, when a radio transmitter is used to trigger an explosive device. Well, meanwhile, some very graphic footage has appeared online claiming to show the aftermath of a massacre carried out by Al-Qaeda-linked fighters. And they've grown ever stronger there in the country, and some analysts say there is a flow of lethal aid that has played a role in this.
The United States provided lethal assistance through Jordan, through CIA, and through Turkey to the opposition. But the opposition is fragmented, incapable, and what's happened is that the more radical elements, principally the foreign fighters, have taken over the opposition in terms of the fighting, and consequently those weapons have gotten into their hands. They've become emboldened. They've gotten better weapons as a consequence. They're getting surface-to-air missiles. They got RPGs, and invariably what will happen is that if you start to pass weapons to the opposition, it inevitably will fall into the hands of the extremists, because they're just much more, in addition to being more radicalized, they are also more fierce fighters, and they have shown that against the opposition.
The rise of Al-Qaeda-linked opposition groups and the raging rebel-on-rebel fighting is causing many to change their view of the conflict in Syria. Former CIA Director Michael Hayden said the Assad regime is beginning to look like the lesser of all evils. And the former US ambassador to Syria, Iraq and Afghanistan, Ryan Crocker, agreed that Assad is not as bad as the jihadis. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov welcomed the change of stance. But in Ankara, there is no change, with its Turkish Foreign Ministry still insisting Assad must go. Expert in Middle East history and politics Jeremy Salt says the rise of Al-Qaeda groups is a much bigger threat to Turkey itself.
The Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant has already threatened to carry out suicide bombings inside Turkey, and in fact carried out one bombing last May in the border town of Reyhanli, which killed more than 50 people. So this is a very dangerous group to be kind of more or less describing as evil. But the ground is changing very rapidly in Syria, and we know what's going on now is that the United States and its allies need to go to Geneva with a credible Syrian opposition. At the moment, they don't have one because the Free Syrian Army is not credible. The Syrian National Coalition has no support inside Syria.
And as the jihadist group, the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant, gains momentum in Syria, across the border in Iraq, they're also controlling key cities in the country's biggest province, Anbar. The government is still holding off its offensive to retake them, but reports are coming in of fierce fighting between government troops and militants in the areas between Fallujah and Ramadi. Well, they fear the civilian casualties may lead to local Sunni tribal leaders siding with the Al-Qaeda militants controlling the cities. Meanwhile, a suicide bomber hit an army recruitment centre in Baghdad on Thursday. 22 soldiers were killed and dozens were wounded. The attack is seen as retaliation against the Iraqi government, which has been calling for new troops to join its fight against Al-Qaeda. The US is weighing in, boosting its missile and surveillance drone deliveries to Iraq, and the move is being greeted with caution by many experts. Peter Lavelle and his guests debate Washington's role in the conflict in Crosstalk later today here on RT International.
The United States spent 9 years applying Hellfire missiles and drones and automation and attacks of all sorts of kinds, and none of that worked. It is the definition of mental illness to keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Introducing weapons into Iraq at this time from the United States will likely have as much success this time as it did the last time.
This is kind of deja vu all over again. It's really quite amazing. I mean, we have to remind our viewers here, there was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq before the invasion, and now they have Fallujah. I mean, come on. I mean, what is the learning curve here, or is there any learning curve at all?
With all of the distortions that are the result of meddling and outright murder by the United States, is this spirit seeking sovereignty, self-determination, dignity, etc.
Okay, all right,
and if we're going to do anything,
Don, but it's interesting.
Take our hands off it first.
You
and let
mentioned
that,
some good words
express
there.
itself, and then ask those people, what can we do for you?